All right, let's untangle a totally fascinating web of political intrigue, personal vendettas, and the massive buildup to an all-out siege. On the surface, we're looking at a classic conflict: territory, survival, the usual stuff. But dig just a little bit deeper, and you realize this whole thing is fundamentally driven by the spectacular absolute failure of a royal marriage. Seriously, the Siege of Orsinium is basically a masterclass in how personal toxicity can completely shatter a geopolitical landscape. So, let's dive into this explainer and break down exactly how this happens.
It really begs the question, right? What happens when the greatest threat to a kingdom isn't the army at its gates, but the ruler sitting right there on the throne? That totally flips a standard fantasy battle into this gripping, character-driven thriller. Because today, we aren't just looking at troops and tactics. We're looking at the fatal flaw of King Joil of Daggerfall. Sure, the immediate physical threat is the orcs amassing power, but Daggerfall's structural weakness? That is entirely domestic. The rot starts at the very top. And honestly, an arrogant leader is very often their own worst enemy.
Just look at how fast these localized raids crippled commerce and absolutely devastated the common folk. This wasn't some distant military skirmish. The orcs were literally choking the lifeblood out of the kingdom's economy. By blocking shipments down the Blaza River, local vendors couldn't even afford to feed their families. They were forced to sell fish at half price just to survive. But man, the economic stranglehold is only half the story. The human cost was brutal, immediate. Villages were given terrifying ultimatums: submit or burn. This resulted in the slaughter of elders and men, while women and children were dragged off into forced labor. The pressure on the crown to respond was absolute.
So, how did we reach this boiling point? Well, if we map out the timeline, we see a century-and-a-half-old grudge between the Red Guards and the Orcs, just simmering quietly in the background. Fast forward to a much tighter window, just 3 years ago, and a completely toxic arranged marriage between the King of Daggerfall and Queen Catherine kicks off, and it's a marriage basically defined by public humiliation. Finally, we hit the spark that ignites the whole powder keg: the present-day orc raids. These three distinct threads are about to collide in spectacular fashion.
To truly understand this disaster, you've got to understand the king's incredibly toxic leadership style. Instead of focusing on, burning villages and massive economic collapse, the king is using his absolute power to demand a young peasant girl named Sia be brought to his chambers. When Lord Tristan politely questions the wisdom of bringing a commoner into the castle during a crisis, the king just lashes out. He tells Tristan that if he had a brain, he'd be an advisor, not a knight. He doesn't lead by inspiration, you guys. He leads by belittlement, fear, and sheer unfiltered arrogance.
And that arrogance? It didn't stop at his council. It bled straight into his royal marriage. He actually complains bitterly to that same peasant girl about Queen Catherine. He deeply resents that his father forced him to marry her just because she was next in line to inherit a noble house in North Point. He completely views her as a political tool, one that he actively dislikes. He's openly mocking her age, her appearance. The audacity is staggering. This isn't just terrible husband behavior, it's a catastrophic political blind spot. He's actively alienating the very person who shares his throne.
Meanwhile, faced with these highly organized orcs, the Royal Council realizes there is no way they can win alone. So they begin a desperate debate over who to recruit. The orcs aren't just isolated in their mountain strongholds anymore. They are united, organized, and absolutely running amok in High Rock. Daggerfall's leadership, including the Grand Master, knows local forces won't cut it against this rising tide. They need a heavy-hitting ally. And that kicks off a high-stakes geopolitical chess match right in the middle of the war room.
So, who do you call for help? The council initially considers the Nords, but they're quickly dismissed. They calculate that bringing Nordic axes and shields against bigger, stronger, more savage orcs would just result in an absolute slaughter. It's actually Queen Catherine who brilliantly suggests the Red Guards. She points out their brutal but highly effective history against the orcs. And, in a classic display of his insufferable character, the king immediately silences her, adopts her idea on the spot, and demands the royal court be told that he came up with it. Classic.
But wait, why not the Nords? It actually comes down to a fascinating piece of lore brought up in the war room. The king assumed the Nords still possessed magical dragon shouts that could completely turn the tide of battle. But his advisors quickly correct him. Following a severe defeat by the Dark Elves, the Nords actually stopped training new warriors in the way of the voice. So without that magical artillery to back them up, they are completely off the board as viable allies.
Okay, so Daggerfall pivots to the Red Guards, but when their messenger arrives in Hammerfell to parley with Master Guy Den Shinji, diplomacy instantly breaks down over historical semantics. The messenger carelessly refers to the past Red Guard campaign against the Orcs as a genocide. Master Shinji fiercely pushes back on that framing. He insists it was a war where they simply liberated the land from an unresearched foe. Now, we aren't here to judge which side of history is correct, but this incredibly tense exchange shows just how raw and volatile this history remains.
A century and a half. That's exactly 150 years since the Red Guards last clashed with the Orcs. Master Shinji actually notes that the Orcs haven't dared show their faces in Hammerfell since that initial conflict. That massive gap means the Red Guards have grown quite comfortable, maybe even a bit complacent about the Orc threat. For Daggerfall, it means they can't just drop in and ask for a favor. They're going to have to craft a highly persuasive argument to pull the Red Guards back into the fray. To recover from that diplomatic blunder, the messenger lays out a masterful three-step pitch. First, he appeals to fear, warning that the Orcs aren't just raiding, they want a full-blown empire. Second, the threat. If they go unchecked in High Rock, they will inevitably march right down to Hammerfell. But it's the third step that really seals the deal. Daggerfall offers a massive share of the soon-to-be-captured Orc territory. For an expanding power like the Red Guards, the promise of rich, new land is simply way too good to pass up. The alliance is officially forged.
But, while the king is busy plotting his grand military conquest, his domestic cruelty finally catches up to him in a shocking twist. Queen Catherine travels in secret directly to Orsinium, standing right before the Orc king Golkar. She exposes Daggerfall's entire military strategy, revealing the secret Red Guard alliance to the enemy. Why would she do this? Simply because the enemy of her abuser is her friend.
3 years. Think about that. For 3 long years, Catherine endured public belittlement. We literally saw it when she tried to contribute to the war room only to be told to speak only when spoken to, right before her husband shamelessly stole her tactical advice. 3 years of being treated as an unwanted, ugly political prop is what finally breaks her loyalty to the crown entirely. It gives her the ultimate motive for high treason.
And her revenge? It isn't just about seeking political asylum. No, she wants blood. She tells King Golkar she doesn't even care about her own life anymore. She only cares about stopping her husband from achieving the one thing he truly values, his legacy. She freely gives up the kingdom's entire battle plan for nothing more than the promise of personal, violent vengeance. It's a stunning display of how deeply personal animosity can completely override national loyalty.
But in a brutal demonstration of Orc pragmatism, King Golkar completely ignores her offer and turns her right into a prisoner of war. The queen thought she was making a pact, but Golkar is a ruthless tactician. He finds her treason mildly amusing, even notes she almost made him smile, but he instantly recognizes her true value. An angry defector is useful, sure, but the Queen of Daggerfall in chains? That is a priceless bargaining chip. He throws her in the dungeon, mocking the princess in her new kingdom. It is a devastating double betrayal that leaves Catherine utterly trapped.
Meanwhile, back at the gates, all those political machinations materialize into a terrifying physical force. You've got the elite, battle-hardened Red Guards standing side by side with the finest fighters from the Knights of the Dragon. Lord Tristan and King Joyle have marched their combined forces right up to the very gates of the Orc stronghold, demanding they come out to negotiate and avoid a complete massacre. The trap is sprung, the armies are set, and the massive gates slowly begin to open. As those massive gates creak open, the king is completely shocked to see his wife standing there with the enemy. He attempts this feigned moment of concern, yelling out that they are going to save her. But Catherine, she completely rejects him. Right there, in front of the amassed armies of multiple nations, she lays bare the reality of their marriage. She gave him everything, tried her hardest to be a loyal wife, and received nothing but dirt in return. As the march forward is finally ordered, she leaves him with 2 chilling words: I won.
Ultimately, this leaves us reflecting on a really chilling realization. It wasn't just the Orcs' ambition that brought Daggerfall to the brink of destruction. It was a king who alienated his allies, abused his wife, and ruled through unchecked ego rather than wisdom. By creating an enemy within his own bedroom, he basically handed his external enemies the ultimate advantage. So, ask yourself as you analyze the history of this massive conflict. If the king had simply treated his queen with just an ounce of respect, would the Siege of Orsinium have ever happened at all?
Hello Hollywood movies lovers, welcome to watch new Hollywood. movies Icebreaker 230, and this is story and watching for and like and subscribe adventure stories and more activities adventure. Hey YouTube, this last activities and my small activities, though not mass content, this my content. Okay YouTube, thank you guys.